For 17 years, a secret remained locked within the McCann family itself. It was never revealed, it was never investigated, but it could change everything we know about the case. Today, we will open the door to that locked room and face the silence the family has kept since the very first day. Every house has a room no one enters. It might be at the end of the hallway with the door always closed, or in the middle of the living room, invisible but heavy. Sometimes it's not locked with a key. It's locked with a pact. For 17 years, that room existed in the McCann family's home. No camera entered, no official question reached it. But those who lived close to the family knew, felt it, because what was there wasn't forensic evidence. It wasn't a detail in the investigation. It was silence. An old, familiar, protected, emotional silence. And that silence to this day shapes everything you think you know about the Madeleine case. There's information known to those close to them that never reached the public. A secret that circulated among friends, doctors, and neighbors. Something too intimate to become a headline. Something that, if confirmed, would turn the story upside down. And the most unsettling part, this detail was never investigated. Indigo investigated. Not even questioned. The media avoided it. The police sidestepped it. And the family counts remained silent. Why? The answer may lie in that symbolic room, the place where the truth is hidden, not by crime, but by bonds, where what is felt is stronger than what is said, and where what is kept silent screams the loudest. So today we won't retrace the same steps of the investigation, nor follow the script laid out in documentaries. Today we will stand before the door no one dared to touch, because if there's a secret that changes everything, it's not on the streets of Portugal, it's inside the house. Since the McCanns' first interview, something felt off. Not in their gestures, not in their words, but in the space between them. As if there was a weight there that no one dared to name, and that everyone pretended not to see. Behind the scenes, close doctors avoided certain comments. Relatives altered small details of the story over the years. And neighbors said, "It's better not to talk about that. It never made headlines, it's not in the documentary. But it's in the eyes of those who were close, and above all, in the absence of questions. Because when no one asks about the room, it's because everyone knows what's inside, and they prefer to keep the door closed. But one question remains. Is this silence a choice or protection? And what if the truth that was never spoken is the most important of all? There are secrets that don't appear in any line of the investigation, but they shape every line of the story. Today, we will open that symbolic door and look at what was left out of the official script. If this bothers you too, must stay, because what comes next isn't a theory. It's the silence no one could hide. Some silences don't come from fear, they come from choice. From that moment, when a family realizes that if they say what they truly know, everything could crumble. In the McCann case, there's an absence that was never filled. Not in missing evidence, but in conversations that never happened. From the night of the disappearance, there was a clear line between what was said to the police and what was avoided. While the whole world followed the external investigations, the searches, the maps, the timelines, no one seemed willing to touch the most intimate part, the relationships inside the house. Who was emotionally close to whom? What were the conversations behind closed doors? What did each person there know but never brought to the table officially? Over the years, small gestures piled up, interviews that skipped questions, variations in simple details, like the exact time of dinner, who saw Madeleine last, or what the family dynamic was really like at the time. None of this, on its own, is enough to point to a truth. But the sum of these omissions raises the question, is the family's silence just trauma or strategy? When you observe the collective behavior, not just of the parents but of siblings, friends, and even the British press, a protective web starts to form around something that was never clearly stated. Something that seems to live in a symbolic space of the story. A space everyone feels but no one names. That's where the idea of the locked room comes in. It's not a distant metaphor, it's the reflection of a conscious choice to keep part of the story out of reach. Not from the police but from the public, not from justice but from emotional judgment. And that silence, even without words, shapes everything. Over time, this silence stopped being a reaction to trauma and became a structure, a kind of implicit pact, a collective decision that certain topics simply aren't touched, not by those who lived it nor by those who investigate. It's as if there's a symbolic perimeter around the family. Not the police perimeter of the crime scene, but an emotional territory. What can be discussed, what will be answered vaguely, what will be deflected with a controlled smile or a precise tear. This kind of shield doesn't form out of nowhere. It takes time, coordination, a mutual understanding that revealing everything might be more dangerous than enduring public doubt. The curious thing is how the media went along with it. Certain questions stopped being asked. Certain names stopped being mentioned. The narrative became, who was the kidnapper? But almost no one stopped to ask, what has this family been emotionally hiding for so many years? And when you look at similar high-profile cases where family trauma was kept intact under layers of silence, you see a pattern. It's not always about guilt. Sometimes it's about preserving an image or a routine, or simply the peace of those who can no longer face what they know. This doesn't mean there's a hidden crime, but it points to something even more disturbing. There's a piece of the story that was never allowed to exist, and perhaps it's exactly there that the hardest truth is hidden. After all, not every lie needs to be spoken. Some are sustained simply by what everyone agrees never to say. And when this kind of silence is upheld by so many people, it's because what's behind the locked door was never small. There's something that many people overlooked, but when you look closely, it starts to bother you. It's not a concrete fact. It's a pattern, a discomfort that appears in small remarks, forced pauses, eyes that look away at the wrong moment. Since the first days after Madeleine's disappearance, the family's public behavior was studied, analyzed, speculated upon, but few noticed that there were two types of reactions happening. One for the world, rehearsed, rational, repeated in press conferences, and another, subtler, rawer, that emerged when the cameras were off. It's as if there were two parallel scripts, the official one answering questions with measured phrases, and the unspoken one living in the gaps, in the details, in answers that seemed to avoid touching certain memories. And the question no one asked was, why so much care not to remember too much? Jerry's public speech, for example, was always firm, direct, but in old interviews there are moments when he freezes, as if a thought crosses his mind before the sentence comes out. The last time I saw Madeleine, pause, squinting eyes, held breath, and then he changes the subject. Kate, in some interviews, mentions nightmares, guilt, difficulty touching her daughter's things, but she almost always cuts the thought short, as if there's something there that can't be said. Not out of fear of the police, but out of a different kind of fear, the fear of what it would reveal about themselves. And here's the most unsettling part. People close to them, doctors, colleagues, even neighbors, all kept silent about what they knew. No direct statements, no accusations, but also no questions, as if everyone had signed an invisible agreement. We know up to this point. Beyond that, we don't speak. That's what makes this silence so heavy. It's not a lack of information. It's an excess of caution, caution about what can't slip out, caution about what's already been said but whose weight no one noticed. And it's in that caution that the secret hides. At some point, silence stops being defense. It becomes a decision. And that choice comes with a cost. There's a difference between not knowing and not saying. And when some people close to the family, who lived through that time, started fading from the debate, stopping interviews, refusing invitations to revisit the story, it became clear there was something more. Not a hidden crime, but a memory. That couldn't be touched. It's as if the truth were kept in an inner room, a room everyone knows exists, but no one dares to open. Or worse, some have opened it, but chose to close it again. And this room isn't physical, it's emotional. It's the place where the questions that were never asked live, where the gestures that don't match the speeches reside, where the kind of pain that doesn't fade with justice or time rests. And the most disturbing thing is knowing that some people hold the key. Doctors who treated the family before the trip, friends who were there in the days before the disappearance, relatives who noticed behavioral changes but chose to believe it was just the weight of the moment. Maybe they'll never say anything. Maybe they're protecting someone, or themselves. Maybe it's love or guilt, or just fear of what happens when an intimate truth becomes public. But that doesn't erase the question, what do they know? And why, after so many years, has no one dared to break this silence? It's Hard to say this without sounding accusatory, but sometimes silence hurts to understand. And there's one thing I can't get out of my head. What if this truth isn't even that big? What if what they're hiding isn't a crime, but a flaw, a shame, something too human to be confessed on camera? Sometimes the truth doesn't destroy, it humiliates, it exposes. It strips someone from the place where they built their entire survival. And when that happens, silence becomes protection, not from justice, but from identity. Because some things, if said, change everything, even who you are. It's strange how certain truths only hurt when they fall into silence. And what comes next? Maybe the most dangerous crack in that door locked for 17 years. The weight of living with a closed door. The first thing that changes isn't the version of the story. It's the way you look at it. When you realize there may never have been just one secret, but a constant, dense cloud hanging over that house, everything starts to make sense in an uncomfortable way. It's not that someone hid a crime. It's that someone carried a silence that shaped every gesture since then. It's as if the daughter's disappearance froze the atmosphere of the house. The emotional temperature hasn't changed since that night. Everything there seems to have stopped in time, even as time moved on. And that's not something you see in reports or interviews, but you can feel it. In Kate's eyes when she holds Madeleine's stuffed animal, in the way Jerry talks about the future always in the plural, as if forcing himself to believe it exists. And that's where the room comes in. The metaphor became reality, because there is, in fact, a room in the house that stayed closed for years. And we're not talking about a suite or a random storage room. We're talking about the place that held the toys, the clothes, the smell, the absence. For a while, no one touched that door. Even close friends avoided that hallway. Not because something was hidden there, but because that's where the pain, too great to be spoken, lived. And that spreads. The silence started as care. Then it became habit. Then it became part of the family's identity. And at that point, it's no longer about justice or truth. It's about emotional survival. The Portuguese police pointed out the discomfort. Why so much resistance to revisiting certain memories? Why so many pauses in simple questions? And the British media hushed it up, changed the subject, protected, as if admitting any fragility were the same as betraying the country or betraying the pain. But fragility isn't a crime, and that's exactly why this secret is so unsettling. It doesn't need to be evidence. It just needs to exist. And that is enough to change everything. In one of the most overlooked parts of the case's coverage, a family friend said a strange phrase that was never explored. They were exhausted even before the trip. When someone pressed her on what that meant, she deflected. Nothing. Much, just the tiredness of parents who work a lot. But it lingered, as if she knew more than she could say, and maybe she did, because that's what makes this silence a symbol. It's not empty. It's full of everything no one knew how to feel out loud. And when that happens, the secret moves. It no longer lives in the fact. It lives in the gesture, in the tone of voice, in the decision not to open a drawer, in the reason behind a refused interview, and above all, it lives in the eyes of those who saw everything and chose to keep it. Have you ever noticed that some houses have a specific smell? Not the smell of food or mold, but a smell that feels old even if everything is clean. Madeleine's room was like that. According to someone close, it kept that air of when someone left in a hurry and said they'd be right back, but never came back. And the family stayed there, sitting in the hallway, trying to move on, but with their ear pressed to the door. That's why we need to change the question. It's not, what did they hide? It's, why could they never say it? Maybe because deep down the answer isn't a sentence, it's a feeling, maybe guilt, maybe too much love, maybe fear of destroying what little remains, and that no one can judge. Sometimes the secret isn't in what happened, it's in everything that could never be felt out loud. And even if no one opens that door, just looking at it already changes how we feel about the entire house. Some things only those who lived through them understand, and some pains only truly hurt when they fall into silence. The crack is open, and the air that came in no longer allows us to pretend nothing was left behind. Some things we understand with our body before we can name them. And this silence, it weighs differently. It's not the same silence as not knowing. It's the silence of knowing but not being able to, or not wanting to, or not bearing it. And when you see all this up close, calmly, with time, with courage, a strange feeling takes over. The locked room in the McCann's house isn't just theirs, it's a symbol. And symbols have this power. They leap from one story to another, carrying memories that aren't always ours, but touch us just the same. Because if we're honest, everyone has a room like that, an emotional corner we avoid opening, a part of the story that was never told, a topic that never came back to the table, a name no one says out loud anymore. Sometimes it's out of care, sometimes it's out of fear of what comes with it, but the effect is always the same. That place starts shaping everything around it, even without being touched. And that's what became clearest throughout this video. What happened there wasn't just a child's disappearance. It was the birth of a pact, invisible but present, not just among family members, but among institutions, spectators, us. We saw contradictory versions, attitudes too cold or too emotional, forgotten testimonies, and others promoted without much explanation. But in the end, what truly remained was this feeling. There's something unspoken, something that didn't make headlines, something that wasn't forgotten because it was never exposed. And maybe it never will be, because some truths don't fit in a sentence. Some answers are too dangerous for those who still need to keep living. This isn't an excuse, nor a judgment. It's just a realization. Sometimes silence is the last refuge a person has, but it can also be what keeps them from moving forward. So if this story left a weight in your chest, maybe it's because it spoke to something you also know. Maybe not exactly, but emotionally. Because the echo of that locked room lives in you too. In me. In the way we deal with what we can't change. And I need to tell you honestly, for me, this video was one of those moments when speaking cost something. Not because I didn't want to, but because I knew that by saying certain things, I'd be opening a crack in places many people spent years trying to keep sealed. But sometimes, a crack is all the truth needs. So if this touched you, if this story lingered in your mind as the video played, if at any moment you felt that chill of realizing something was said without direct words, then maybe this experience was yours as much as it was mine. And if you felt that, I'm going to ask you something. Not for me, but so stories like this keep being told with the depth they deserve. If you believe stories like this can't be buried anymore, leave a sign. The super chat here isn't just a gesture, it's a symbol. It's like saying, I saw, I felt, and I want others to see too. It's like pulling that thread no one dared to touch. It's like standing at the locked door and even without a key saying, I'm here. If this room disturbed you too, if this story stirred something you had kept inside, send your voice back. It can be a line. It can be a symbol. Write, my voice goes where silence closed in. Or, I opened the door they locked. Because those who comment here aren't just spectators. They're part of this story. They're someone who didn't look away. And if you want to stay with us, there's more. The next video talks about a similar case, but where the silence came from somewhere else. This time it wasn't the family that stayed silent. It was the entire system. And the pain became political. If you seek stories that reveal what no one wants to remember, you need to see this. Subscribe if you're really here with me. Because each new video isn't just content, it's continuity. Here's the attempt to pull one more thread. Until everything that was silenced starts to have a name now, I want to know what this stirred in you. What was the part that hit you the most? Leave your thoughts below. It can be just a line, but let it be real. I'll read everyone. Not every silence is forgetting, and some truths only survive when we refuse to forget. Thank you for staying. Until the end. I'll meet you on the other side of the crack.